I think a part of knowing yourself is like realizing like when your life is gonna start crumbling because you're, in the lab for 20 hours a day, which should never happen, right? But I think knowing yourself is a big part of that.
Hi, Wolfpack fans. Today on Engineering Pack Pod, we are going to have a conversation with Dr. Danny Smyl. Hi, Danny.
Hey, what's going on?
It's going on in Raleigh right now. It's a beautiful day, and I know you're over in Atlanta, so we're really excited to have a little chat with you. Do you like it if I call you by your first name or doctor?
Danny, please.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. So we're going to go with that. So we're going to start off with your 60-second elevator pitch.
Yeah, I'm a Kansan originally. I'm a I'm as big of a Jayhawk as I am a Wolfpack guy. Maybe a little bit more Jayhawk, but no disrespect to the Wolfpack. I love them. Grew up there, got an undergrad in engineering for I have no idea why. Just kind of hopped into something. And then I decided to join the military after that. Got a master's at KU, became a combat engineer in the Marines. Spent quite a bit of time active duty and then reserves as well. Basically doing demolitions. So I'm a structural engineer now, so I like to joke that all the buildings that we destroyed around Afghanistan, all the old bases and stuff, now my retribution is being a structural engineer, doing something positive for these structures. Then got a Fulbright when I was at NC State doing my PhD. Spent some time in Finland where I was in applied math. Stayed there for a postdoc, actually in applied math and mechanical engineering. Was in the UK for a while as a lecturer, in Alabama for a while as a lecturer before I settled down here at Georgia Tech, where I do a lot of work in structural engineering and artificial intelligence and inverse problems.
Wonderful background. And I'd love to start our conversation with a little bit about your military experience. And I know after you went to NC State, you were in the military. What influenced your approach from the military to current problem solving and engineering challenges? Just any lessons you learned.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of being in the military, well, taking a step back, actually, I was stationed in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, which is why I ended up in NC State. Um, and actually, being in the military, um, I joined because I didn't want to be a regular structural engineer doing that kind of work. I find that not really my personality. I'm not that like a detail-oriented, obsessive as a person to do that thing over and over. So when I actually got out of the military, I again didn't want to be a regular structural engineer. Um, and so I came to NC State to get into research because I actually done a bit of that at KU, working for Bob Parsons in geotechnical engineering. But in terms of the skills that I learned from the military, actually pretty much not very much technical at all. You learn more about leadership, especially because I was an officer. And of course, you go through all these like leadership schools and formal schools and hardcore training as a Marine and stuff like that. But actually, when I really learned about leadership was through two people. One was my platoon sergeant, so that's like kind of like the highest enlisted person that reports to you, who basically tells you what not to do, and very firmly and sometimes not politely tells you to stop doing that. And actually, we're going to do it my way. And your lack of experience is going to be weighed against my experience and that kind of thing. But I had an excellent platoon sergeant. Justin Blaisdell, was fantastic. Um, Taught me about engineering from an enlisted standpoint and taught me about leadership from a human standpoint. And he was an awesome leader, firm when he needed to be and a goof when he didn't need to be. And then I had an officer above me who was horrible, just absolute abomination of a leader. And that's when I realized that learning leadership is more about taking examples and things that you want from them, and then what you don't want from them, and then deciding which path that you want to take. I later on had a really good commander, so the guy above me, who's now actually a hedge fund manager, and he was just the most fun, bombastic guy. And so I took a lot of those leadership styles and kind of brought them together the way that I wanted to be. So
And I'm curious when you kind of go through that chronology of these people, maybe the not so great leader, and then the other leaders that were really positive influences on you, what is the one takeaway, the nugget that you would give to people from what you learned?
Listen to people that you're above. They're the ones that really judge you. Um, sure, you have your, your yearly reports or whatever from your boss and stuff like that. But the person who can really weigh your character is the person that reports to you. And oftentimes that person is way more experienced than you. So that's what I took away. Being humble and respecting their side of things is key, in my opinion.
Fantastic advice. Yeah, they say you get two ears and one mouth for a reason, but it is common for us to be thinking about what we want to say rather than really listening. That's such a skill. I'm glad that you underlined and bolded that and all caps that. Well, let's move on to your NC State. So, coming out of the military from Camp Lejeune, you came to NC State, you're an alumnus. What do you think sets our university apart in preparing engineers for this evolving workforce?
The mixture and diversity of the faculty, in my opinion, are really it. You have It's a huge engineering school, right? It's one of the top 20, top 25 engineering schools in the United States. You get people with all different viewpoints, not only like in terms of engineering topics or scientific topics, but in terms of backgrounds, religious, cultural, etc. Um, is really amazing. And so when I first joined NC State, which was on some hand random, but also I had a great advisor, Mo Porgaz, who's still in civil over there. Um, his group was pretty much entirely Persian people, and then like one white guy, right, which was me. And I'll tell you what, like I knew almost nothing about the Persian culture, and they taught me, of course, all the bad words that I shouldn't know in Persian. But they taught me so many things about their culture, how diverse their culture was, how similar they feel like their personalities are to Americans. Large mouth, like ambitious, creative people. And when I got to know them over the years, I realized it's actually really true. And so I would say, in terms of NC State, the personalities and the faculty are really what make it. The diversity is really, well, I know it's a triggering word in today's day and age, but that's my opinion, so I can say it.
You can absolutely say it. And as a student currently listening to this, what would you advise them to maximize their time to just build an impactful career? It sounds like getting connected to all these interesting people and starting conversation is a really important thing. What else?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like building connections. Like you can go really far technically, and it will take you to a certain point. But I believe at some certain point, you have to already have that technical skill set. And then how do you go beyond that is like being a good person, being engaging with people. And for me, like I honestly had like a quite a bit of like imposter syndrome and like anxiety, and I still do. Right, we live with that for all of our lives, and so building the skill set to be able to deal with that, put it in the back, and do my thing was really important. At NC State, I was in an awesome lab at CFL. So that's run by Mervyn Kowalski and Greg Lucier. And Greg, especially, people who know Greg, is the nicest guy ever. And he taught me a lot about not being afraid to do the nitty gritty dirt like work, right? Like, sure, you're doing a PhD and that's really cool, high level stuff, but okay, if you want to actually be successful, you need to be able to run the experiments. You need to be able to understand what's going on behind it. So, getting over a lot of those BS fears and being honest with yourself, I think is a really good skill set to learn. I think I went off on a tangent there, but
I think you got to something really important, and I actually wanted to dive into the skill set that you mentioned. So, first of all, let's just normalize being a human is hard. Getting your PhD in engineering at one of the top schools in the world is hard, and you shouldn't be suffering the entire time. But imposter syndrome and anxiety are two things you identified. Any more you can say about how you have learned to manage that when it creeps in?
honestly, therapy. I started doing counseling. I was having some issues with like pretty bad PTSD after combat deployments and stuff like that. And that was like kind of creeping in on it. And it still does. I still deal with it every day. These are not coming to terms with the fact that things like PTSD and anxiety and other issues that a person might have are not curable is actually comforting in a really weird way because it's like, okay, I'm going to deal with this crap for the rest of my life. I'm just going to come to terms with it and find ways to deal with it. And that's how I got through it. And the way that I was helped personally was through the VA, who has counseling programs, and then also um, other just other random counseling in the other places I've lived, and it's been extremely helpful to me. So if you're having a problem, like don't be a tough person. Like if a Marine can like not be a tough person, then I think anybody can go get counseling. And if you are like in university, like NC State or wherever, they have actually really good resources. Like go to them; they're like free. So do that.
Yeah, we'll link up to those in our show notes. And thanks, Danny, for being so vulnerable and genuine in saying what you have struggled with. Is there a quick story you can tell us about how the PTSD impacts you or impacted you and a strategy you used because you know it's going to be here forever?
Yeah, the things for me is like sleeping has been an issue for a very long time. As you can see, like I wake up in the middle of the night, that kind of thing, right? And it gives me like a weird sense of insecurity, like related to one of my commanders that I had, the really bad one. He was like a pretty abusive, like person. I don't mean like physically, but like in other ways, right? To everybody, right? And like we had a mission go really, really wrong, and three guys died. And I still like think about that like multiple times a day. And again, some of these kinds of things, and like whether a person has had like trauma maybe in their youth or an abusive parent or extrapolate beyond whatever problem they may have, like um, there's going to be issues with that for the rest of your life, in my opinion, right? So finding meaningful ways to deal with it is like totally critical. And
I completely agree with the therapy and having a place to process through that because I always use the beach ball analogy where
mm,
when you have something really hard that you push under the water like a beach ball, eventually what
yeah,
happens?
yeah, something explodes, right? And then you do something you regret, right? Which we've all done things that we regret, and we think back like 5 years later and cringe about that, like, but like, especially like related to people doing graduate studies or PhDs, like I'm not referring to NC State specifically because I've had really good experience with the faculty there, but sometimes there can be situations where you have like an abusive advisor, right? And I'm an advisor myself, so I'm very cognizant of this, and um, I see this from time to time. But recognizing that like there's a problem with that and talking to another faculty member can be really a huge boost and step up in the quality of your life, right? So this stuff happens no matter what like power differential situation that a person is in. So
Absolutely. And I remember hearing from an advisor, I'm going to push you until you tell me to stop. And that can feel very overwhelming to someone who doesn't want to say stop. How do
yeah.
you recommend setting capacity limits? Because you don't want to let your boss slash advisor down. And as the boss now, but previously the students, what did you learn?
I would say like knowing your limits. In the Marines, although we don't stick to this generally, we have like the commandments, so to speak, of the Marines, and one of them is to know yourself and to seek self-improvement. And I think a part of knowing yourself is like realizing like when your life is gonna start crumbling because you're, in the lab for 20 hours a day, which should never happen, right? But I think knowing yourself is a big part of that.
That is a really important statement. Understanding yourself and communicating that to the person who you're working with because they might not know what's going on in your life until you share that. Maybe you're leaving at 5 o'clock because you have to pick your grandmother up from chemotherapy.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are uncomfortable sharing personal matters. What's your thought on that?
I mean, I try to be tactful when I'm talking about somebody else's situation or who they are, but I just say what's afflicting me. Like, I mean, like I'm open with my colleagues about my PTSD, right? Like, and I have a senior colleague who's like much more senior than me, like by a lot. And he's like, man, like, Vietnam era, like we would never do that back in the day, right? And I'm like, dude, Marines have changed a lot since then, right? Like, we feel like being open is a good valve to turn on when you're having a problem, right? Um, like if you look at that's actually a really complicated issue. If you look at it statistically, I'm actually not sure that's true. But it is for me anyways. Talking about things and being open about them has been very helpful for me.
And I'm so glad you use the resources through the VA and that our students also have resources. Like you said, it is there for you. You have this and when you graduate, you will be paying for that.
Yeah,
So
for
it's
sure.
it's definitely one of the really useful resources that we have on our campus. All right, let's move from some of this heavy stuff to AI. Okay, quick transition because I know that's what a lot of people are talking about right now. And you are kind of at the cutting edge of that with your work intersecting with AI and structural engineering. I'm going to just give you a really lob out of very general questions. How is it influencing us right now and in the future?
It's gonna totally upend everything. I mean, it's already at the point where like even the most basic chat GPT model can has more knowledge than every human on any one individual human on the planet. I think even the O3 mini model in chat GPT like is already like the 40th best programmer like in the world, like based off of certain metrics or whatever. So it's going to totally upend everything. I think a lot of industries are going to become automated. For example, like a lot of the legal industries, a lot of things that are repetitive, a lot of manufacturing jobs, things of that nature are going to go out of the way. So a lot of my work is in using machine learning to do structural design, right? Conceptual. So like the initial phase is like you feed this into like a machine learning algorithm that spits out like a rough approximation of what this structure should be, right? So one of the questions that I get is it going to take our jobs, right, as structural engineers? And actually, I plug here, I have an article coming out in a month in Structure Mag that's going to talk about this. But the long and skinny of it is I don't think so. I think it's going to empower us to do non-trivial tasks. Um, some things that engineers do, some people like doing this, some people don't, but like just doing repetitive calculations and guessing and checking work, this is going to potentially take a huge chunk of that out, right? So now engineers can focus on being creative, right? And they actually have to have higher level skills than I think we would have had before because you have to be able to call the program out, be able to be like, hey, this is wrong. Um, and here's the really interesting thing about this in terms of structural engineering. Um, like I've submitted many papers and grants recently and with a little bit of success, but mostly getting destroyed by the reviewers, right? All academic reviewers, most or at least mostly as far as I'm concerned, they all say that we should not teach any of our undergrads or whatever about AI because it's going to make them bad structural engineers. On the other hand, industry is like the exact opposite. No, we're going to embrace it. We see that this is the way forward. Meanwhile, academia is like on the other side. We're like holding ourselves back from being leaders in this, right? Which is the opposite of the way it should be. It should be academicians like doing the crazy stuff, doing the frontier work, and not industry having like the more progressive attitude about this. So I find that really curious. So I guess my biggest uncertainty is like, what is going to happen with academia? Like, at least in my field, like, are we gonna move forward in this and take a leadership role, or are we gonna wait till industry doesn't figure out how they black boxed it?
That'll be interesting to watch, and we'll definitely have to link to your article. So we're going to end today with our time machine question. We've been talking a little bit about the future. So we're going to hop in the time machine and go 20 years into the future. So we're going to be thinking about, 2045. You can
Gosh,
calculate your age right now, but I won't ask you to say it. And what I want to ask you is what does Danny smell today? in 2025 need to hear from his future self?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Like the majority of the things that you do, speaking to myself here, the majority of the things that you do is going to be a failure. Like 95 to 99% of the things you do is going to be a failure. And you don't have to be insecure about that. That's actually the way that you learn and that you improve on things. And a lot of your life is going to be painful guess and check work. And um, you're going to have problems with that, right? Fighting with your own ego, etc. But you're going to retire one day and be fishing every day like you want to be. So, in the end, it's going to be hopefully a lot of good fun to look back on, and it still is good fun. Speaking in the present tense, so.